There are encounters in life that seem to defy time, logic, and even reason itself. They are connections that arise as if they were written long before our very first steps in this existence. When two souls are meant to be, distance, missed opportunities, or silences do not matter. They recognize one another. There is something invisible yet visceral that keeps them bound. This bond transcends the surface and touches the very core of being, as if a forgotten part of ourselves were returned to us in the other's gaze. On this profound journey, we will explore what it means to have a bond that endures all separations. How is this experience understood in light of Carl Jung's psychology? Which forces operate behind the scenes of this union that defies chance? Prepare to delve into a realm where soul, destiny, and individuation intertwine. Leave in the comments, "I recognize soul encounters." In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, deep encounters between two souls are understood as manifestations of the individuation process, the path toward the wholeness of the self. When two people connect so intensely and transformatively, it is not merely an emotional affinity, but an archetypal mirroring in which unconscious aspects of one are reflected in the other. Jung said that the other often carries our shadow, the set of repressed or unknown qualities we reject in ourselves. In significant relationships, especially those that appear predestined, the shadow is invoked, bringing with it the possibility of integration. This process can be challenging because what we most love in the other is also what disturbs us most, precisely because it activates deep parts of our psyche that cry out for recognition. Moreover, Jung proposed that within each person exist feminine and masculine elements, anima and animus, that seek expression and balance. A meant-to-be relationship can act as a portal for integrating these internal archetypes. When we feel magnetically drawn to someone, it may be the unconscious signaling that this relationship holds the potential to awaken and transform us. In this context, separation becomes impossible not for romantic reasons, but because there is a psychic task to be accomplished. The other becomes an essential mirror on our path of self-discovery. When two souls are ready to meet, it is the self, the center of psychic wholeness, that orchestrates this reunion. And when this union occurs under the guidance of the self, it transcends time, space, and even free will. In Jung's analytical psychology, the self represents the center and totality of the psyche, the instance that transcends the ego and coordinates the individuation process. The self is not merely an abstract concept, but a living reality within each person, silently guiding their choices, encounters, and most significant experiences. When two souls reunite in a deeply transformative way, this experience can be understood as a direct manifestation of the self in action. Unlike idealized love, the reunion of souls is not based solely on superficial affinities or social conveniences. There is something archetypal manifesting in these encounters, a sense of inexplicable familiarity, an immediate recognition, as if the soul had rediscovered something essential to itself. This happens because the self operates through symbols and synchronicities, guiding consciousness toward what needs integration. The other, in this context, appears as the bearer of an inner calling, something that propels us beyond the familiar. Jung believed that certain encounters are not random, but carry a deep psychic function. They place us before our most hidden truths, our oldest wounds, and also our greatest potentials. The self orchestrates these reunions to activate processes that on our own we might never initiate. The other becomes both a mirror and a living symbol of transformation. It is common for feelings of destiny, mission, and a connection that defies logic and time to arise in these reunions. This occurs because the self operates at the level of the collective unconscious, where past, present, and future intertwine. The reunion of souls is less a coincidence and more a summons. The soul, guided by this deeper center, recognizes in the other a piece of its own path of healing and expansion. At the same time, this type of bond is not without challenges. On the contrary, the more significant the connection, the more it exposes the aspects that must be transformed. The intensity of the reunion can awaken unconscious memories, repetitive patterns, and resistances that need to be transcended. This is one of the signs that the self is at work. It does not seek comfort, but growth. The bond is not only effective, but initiatory. This reunion sometimes demands ruptures with old versions of ourselves. It forces us to confront masks, social roles, and illusions that no longer serve our true selves. By guiding two souls toward each other, the self is, in effect, calling them to a deeper commitment to their own truth. In this sense, love ceases to be just an emotion and becomes a pathway to spiritual awakening. It is important to understand that this kind of bond is not limited to the romantic plane. It can emerge in friendships, creative partnerships, or connections that last only brief moments but leave eternal marks. The criterion is not duration, but the depth of impact. The reunion of souls is, above all, a symbolic event. It is as if the unconscious proclaims, "Here is something you need to live in order to become who you are." When Jung speaks of wholeness, he is not talking about perfection, but integration. And the other, in this type of encounter, carries precisely what our consciousness lacks. That is why the reunion is inevitable, not as a whim of fate, but as an archetypal necessity of the soul to re-encounter itself through the other. In this context, separation becomes impossible because there is an inner task to be fulfilled, and as long as it remains unfinished, the bond stays alive, active, and transformative. In those deep encounters that feel steeped in destiny, it is common for the other to be invested with qualities that actually belong to our inner world. Jung called this phenomenon projection, the unconscious act of transferring our own psychic contents onto another person. Especially in relationships that evoke the sensation of a soul reunion, this projection is intensified because the emotional impact is so strong that there is little distinction between what is ours and what truly belongs to the other. When two souls recognize each other, the collective unconscious manifests itself vividly, and archetypal images come to life. Idealizing the other as a soulmate or missing piece is often an expression of projecting the anima or animus, the internal feminine and masculine archetypes present in all of us, onto that person. We project onto the other what we lack in ourselves, what we do not access consciously but long to find. The other then becomes a canvas for our deepest yearnings. This projection can create an intense, yet illusory bond. It is not about intentional deceit or falsehood, but a natural mechanism of the psyche. The unconscious seeks wholeness, and through projection, it attempts to bring repressed or neglected aspects into consciousness. However, when projection persists without reflection, the relationship becomes unbalanced. The other is seen not as they are, but as we want them to be, and this inevitably breeds frustration, disappointment, and suffering. In soul relationships, projection is especially powerful because it serves individuation. The self uses the emotional bond to bring to light unconscious contents that we need to integrate. The emotional intensity, the sense of inevitability, the pain and ecstasy experienced in these connections are, to a large extent, fueled by these psychic images that emerge from within and lodge themselves in the face of the other. At first, projection can feel like a blessing. The other is seen as perfect, as the bearer of everything we lack. But over time, as coexistence deepens or differences emerge, that veil begins to break. The challenge is to recognize that what we admire or reject in the other reveals more about ourselves than about them. When projection is acknowledged, it becomes a pathway to our own soul. Jung warned that working with projection requires courage, because when we remove from the other the qualities that were wrongfully attributed to them, we must confront our own incompleteness. The person who seemed to be the answer to everything reveals themselves as human, imperfect, limited, and that is where a truly authentic relationship begins. In that moment, we stop loving an image and begin loving a real person with all that they are, not only with what we projected onto them. Projection, therefore, is an initial and necessary stage of deep love. It serves to activate dormant parts of our psyche, but should not be the final destination of the bond. When we succeed in withdrawing projections and seeing the other clearly, the soul frees itself. The love that remains after projection dissolves is more mature, more conscious, more real. It is a love that recognizes the other as a separate being, yet still essential to our journey. Soul relationships do not exist to complete us, but to reveal us. They are mirrors reflecting both our light and our shadows. Projection is only the first reflection. The challenge is to go beyond it and reach a state of communion in which the other ceases to be an ideal and becomes a partner in the journey of integration and expansion. In bonds that carry unusual intensity, such as those perceived as soul reunions, the presence of the shadow is unavoidable. Carl Jung described the shadow as the unconscious aspect of personality that the conscious ego rejects, ignores, or does not know. It contains both negative characteristics and undeveloped potentials. In deep relationships, this shadow is activated, unveiled, and projected powerfully, becoming both a threat and an opportunity for transformation. When we connect with someone we feel is destined, we encounter parts of ourselves that might never have emerged on our own. The intensity of the bond causes old traumas, fears, and wounds to surface, not as something external, but as internal reactions triggered by the relationship. The other then becomes a mirror reflecting our most hidden truths, and it is in that reflection that the shadow appears. In irrational jealousy, in excessive expectations, in inexplicable conflicts, in pains that make no sense in the present. Many intense relationships fail or become dysfunctional precisely because the presence of the shadow is not recognized. The other is blamed for feelings that actually belong to our own inner world. Instead of seeing the pain as a psychic manifestation demanding attention, we project onto our partner the responsibility for everything we feel. This creates cycles of accusation, distancing, and emotional confusion. What Jung proposes is that we look inward in these moments, not outward. That we understand that the intensity of love is also the intensity of our unconscious asking to be seen. The shadow's role in these bonds is precisely to force us to grow. It places before us what we cannot recognize alone. In soul reunions, this happens with such depth that it often frightens us. We love and hate with equal force. We feel whole and, at the same time, terrorized by the vulnerability the other reveals. The soul recognizes in the other a piece of itself, but the ego fears losing control. This struggle between ego and soul is fertile ground for the shadow's activity, and it is exactly at this point that the relationship may become a true field of individuation. Confronting the shadow in the context of love demands radical honesty, admitting resentments, envies, impulses toward domination or emotional dependence. Not to act on them, but to acknowledge them and thus begin to dissolve their unconscious power. The shadow does not need to be eliminated, it needs to be integrated. This means accepting that there are aspects of ourselves that are not ideal, but that, when recognized, make us more whole. The other, by evoking our shadow, offers us a disguised gift, the chance to become more authentic, more human, and less identified with an idealized image of ourselves. The conflicts in the relationship cease to be failures and become opportunities for inner work. Awareness is key. When we perceive that the discomfort the other causes us may be a sign of our own shadow expressing itself, we are freed from the need to control or change the other. We begin to use the relationship as a path to self-knowledge, allowing it to shape us not by submission, but by revelation. This attitude transforms the bond into something sacred, as it becomes a catalyst for our inner evolution. In deep bonds, the shadow is therefore inevitable, but also indispensable. Without it, the relationship would remain on the surface, limited by idealizations and defenses. With it, there is pain, yes, but also truth. And where there is truth, there is room for a love that not only enchants, but transforms. A love that, instead of protecting us from life, invites us to live it fully with all its lights and shadows. From Carl Jung's perspective, the fundamental aim of psychic life is not to achieve superficial happiness, but to realize individuation, a continuous process of integrating the conscious and unconscious aspects of the self. When experienced with depth and awareness, destined love becomes one of the most powerful avenues to catalyze this journey. It is not merely about being with someone, but about being transformed by that encounter. When two souls reunite under the guidance of the self, this bond becomes a mirror and an impetus, revelation and challenge, love and inner alchemy. Destined love compels us to abandon the persona, the social mask we build to be accepted, and to confront directly who we really are. In such bonds, it is not possible to maintain appearances for long. The other sees what we hide, even from ourselves. That is why many times, these relationships cause as much discomfort as ecstasy. They shake structures, awaken existential questions, and reveal truths the ego would rather keep asleep. Unlike idealized love, which seeks security, stability, and predictability, destined love is an invitation to the unknown. It forces us to look inward and walk toward the center of our own being. It is at that point that it aligns with the individuation process. Meeting the other, far from being an end in itself, becomes a gateway to meeting ourselves. What is at stake is not only the relationship, but the realization of the soul. The self uses love as an organizing force, a symbolic guide for transformation. This love does not eliminate suffering but resignifies it. Conflicts, distance, and even momentary breakups take on a deeper meaning. They are psychic movements that propel us toward new layers of consciousness. We often think that the purpose of love is permanence, but in destined love, the purpose is transformation. If the relationship endures, it is because both individuals have embraced the challenge of their own individuation. If it dissolves, that does not mean failure, but that the psychic task in that bond has been fulfilled. Destined love reveals what Jung called the tension of opposites, the coexistence of contradictory forces within us. Reason and emotion, desire and fear, freedom and commitment. In these bonds, these polarities intensify, demanding conscious choices. The impulse to flee can be as strong as that to surrender, and it is in the balance between these extremes that individuation takes place. Each crisis in the relationship is, in fact, an opportunity for integration. Each moment of silence, a chance to listen to oneself. Each reunion, a confirmation that something greater is guiding the way. In destined love, there is no room for masks, but there is room for mystery. There is a surrender to the process, a trust that everything that emerges from the relationship, no matter how painful or challenging, serves a greater purpose. And that purpose is the blossoming of the soul in its fullness. The relationship becomes a living school, where learning comes not only from dialogue but from presence, from conflict, from absence, and above all, from inner listening. This kind of love is not found every day. It is rare because it demands maturity, courage, and willingness for self-discovery. Often it appears when we least expect it and completely transforms our trajectory. It does not come to confirm certainties but to deconstruct them. And in that process, it reveals that true love is not the one that completes us, but the one that makes us whole. Therefore, when it is said that when souls are meant, separation becomes impossible, it does not speak only of being physically together, but of a connection that crosses the psyche. Even if there is distance, the bond remains. Even if there is no daily interaction, the transformation sparked by the encounter resonates. And on the journey of individuation, that is what matters most. That each relationship brings us closer to who we truly are. In that sense, destined love is a silent teacher, an archetypal force that calls us inward and invites us to be whole with courage. When two souls reunite under the guidance of the deep unconscious, it is not just a meeting between people, but a reunion with destiny itself. As we have seen, Jungian psychology offers powerful tools to understand why certain connections seem to transcend logic, distance, and even time. The self guides, projection reveals, the shadow confronts, and in the end, love becomes a path of individuation. These bonds are not mere whims of the heart, but psychic events laden with meaning. They deconstruct and recreate us, inviting us to a more conscious life, closer to the wholeness of being. When we experience this kind of love, separation becomes merely apparent, because the true link is internal, symbolic, and eternal. If this content touched you in any way, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue producing deep reflections on being, love, and the soul. And if you want to expand your self-knowledge even further, click on the video that is appearing on the screen now. The journey is long, but each step toward the soul is worth it. And remember, true encounters are never by chance.